Askreddit, people who have been homeless. What was the first night without a home like, and how did you adapt to your new situation? Slept in my vehicle, couch surfed with a friend, squatted in an unused trailer, all while still working at a Walmart. Saved enough to get a crappy apartment and just kept going from there. Respect and admiration to you, that's something to be proud of. I didn't really realize what was going on, I was about 6 to 7 at the time. Dad said we were going to go for a drive and to pack my backpack with all the clothes I could fit and one toy. Mom was just crying. Me and my brother sat in the backseat, he was a little older and was holding our Sega Genesis and looking scared. We drove for a little while, it was already getting dark, and we parked in front of a Walmart and Dad said he had to rest for a while. Was the first of many nights we slept in the car. I remember one of my parents was always awake, with their hand in their coat pocket. Looking back, it was obvious they had a gun for protection, sleeping in shifts. Edit, Jesus, this blew up and thanks for the gold. Trying to respond to all but my poor inbox. Edit 2, WTF guys 3 gold? Thank you. What a terrifying place to find oneself in, especially as a child. I won't pretend that I could ever begin to imagine what that was like, but I'm sorry you've had to have that experience. Hope you're doing much better, and hope you have an absolutely wonderful cake day. I was homeless for a couple of months a year or two ago. I had a car and a low-paying job, so I lived in the woods in a tent for a bit. The first night was miserable. I ended up sleeping really uncomfortably in the passenger seat of my car and it was a really cold night. After that I got a tent and slept on an old climbing pad I had. The first night was hell, but the next several weeks were actually not so bad. I had a spot in the woods where I was well hidden and would cook over a fire. I really didn't have it that bad, but it gave me quite a bit of sympathy for people who really do end up on the streets in a much more desperate situation. Shit is not easy. Hats off to you, because just reading that gave me the spooks. Weren't you scared out in the woods on your own? I kept waking up in the middle of the night and would start walking home. I'd get a few steps, then stop and realize I had nowhere to go and turn and walk back over and lay on the ground. The ground is very cold and I felt a lot of shame. Sounds terrifying, honestly. I don't know that it would even really sink in, the fact of the matter. Hope you're doing better. First night my wife and I landed up sleeping outside. We slept in a local park that I knew. We had come down from the countryside with a few rands, enough for one meal maybe, and had hoped to stay with a friend. He was unable to give us a place to stay, so we had to sleep outside. After the insecurity of that first night, I told my wife that we have to find a safer place to sleep, so we climbed up the slopes of Table Mountain, about a 1-hour walk, and found quite a obscured spot amongst some bushes and trees. We cleared it out of sticks and rocks, made it a bit habitable and then went to the city looking for work. We'd spend the day going from one place to the next looking for work until it started growing dark. Then we'd head up the mountain to our little spot for the night. Did that daily for a month until we were able to secure a small shack room in the townships, where we stayed for another few months until I get a job offer. Was my wife's temp waitering jobs that kept us fed whilst I was looking for work. Biggest challenge was mental, keeping focused, clean, looking presentable and just making my job looking for a job. A legit Bergie edit X Bergie on Reddit. That's a crazy story, man. I hope you're better off now. When I was a teenager I had lots of problems with my mom. I pretty much chose to be homeless. I slept at a Catholic church across from my high school so I could still make it to school and graduate early. I remember feeling really sad because I slept where they put people's ashes, and I remember being so sad that those people could comfort me in death more than anybody alive. I used to talk to them. If there's camera footage I look insane. I never realized how alone I was in the world until I was homeless. And I never realized how cold concrete can be. It chills you right to your bones and is painful. Alone and cold. I used a concrete step in a blizzard as a pillow my first night homeless. I'm lucky to be alive, and glad to have made it. Sleeping in my car wasn't that bad. It was summer, so it was pretty warm, which was my biggest issue. Showered in the gym, and spent most of my day at the library before going to work. For the first few nights it wasn't bad. However, one night police found me sleeping in my car and escorted me to the local homeless shelter, which was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. Since I'm lying there in a top bunk, when a huge argument breaks out because one guy breaks out some meth, wouldn't share it with a second, then a third got pissed and started screaming at them to be quiet because he needed to sleep. Edit. Since this is coming up a lot, people keep asking how it was legal that the police escorted me to the shelter. I don't know the legality of the issue. What I can say is that I was woken up by a knock on my window to see 4 cops, 2 cop cars. They were singing those super bright flashlights through my window at me, and I didn't even think of arguing with them. Showered in the gym, and spent most of my day at the library before going to work. Exactly my experience. LMAO. Worked out and showered at the gym each morning, headed over to the library to frack around online and figure out where TF I was gonna sleep that night. I started being homeless at 19. A previous foster parent put me out for coming home from college one night, and I had called up a friend last minute. When I started to realize I wouldn't be able to crash or stay anywhere, I am fairly certain I started to dread, and spiral into a constant, underlying depressive state. All I could think about was, am I going to die like this? Do I matter? Will no one help me? I'm sad, I'm scared. I don't want to feel like I have to beg. What if I'm stuck like this? Is this really my life right now? 19 to 26 was a very challenging time. Edit. I am stunned, taken aback and truly appreciate the feedback and support that's been granted to me this day, and will continue to respond, but I am not used to so much verbal traffic to peruse. Nevertheless, I will make an AMA upon several Redditors' suggestions, as a lot of this can be encapsulated in so many words, and I want to help by way of sharing. Thank you all again, and I am still doing my very best, better or worse to this day. I simply have no intention on going backwards. Hugging face. Black heart, green heart, yellow heart. Second edit. I have now put an AMA up as per request. I will gladly answer just about anything that anyone wants to know, and please, use my experience to consider helping others. Please and thank you. It was terrifying and cold and hungry. I didn't sleep a wink. I adapted over time. Extremely steep learning curve to surviving homelessness. Nothing really prepares you for it. Must have been awful. I can't imagine being in such a position. I would have no idea where to go or what to do. I hope things are better for you. I was kicked out by my mother at 16 and spent 2 months homeless before the local authority placed me in foster care. I think what hit me first was how my own mother could make one of her own children homeless. I felt like the least favorite of her children. It all came out of nowhere. I racked my brain for years after, trying to think of what I might have done in particular. Also, the crippling loneliness you feel when you are trying to get hold of people to ask for a place to sleep for the night. I could not feel more alone in the world when someone would either not answer my message or tell me they were busy. I'm pretty sure I camped out in the park that night. Didn't sleep at all. What was your mother's reason? She had other children and kept them at home but decided to kick you out? I'm sorry man, I hope you're doing well now. I was about 9 years old, and my mom said we were going on a camping trip. I didn't really suspect anything, as it was summertime and we went camping a lot when I was younger. Although I did wonder why we were packing so much stuff. After a few weeks of camping, I started to complain, but my mom kept insisting that it was good for us to get in touch with nature, etc. Then school started, and we were still camping. And we kept camping for another 6 months. When we finally got a house, my mom cried with joy. And we don't camp anymore. To me, that reads as your mother trying to protect you as best she could and keep things positive for you. Staying strong in the face of terrible circumstances. Good on her. I was getting high, so it really didn't truly sink in until I was broke and dope sick. Then the desperation started. Going to gas stations, jumping car to car asking for money. Stealing what I had to. It was a miserable existence. There are so many things you don't think about when you're not homeless, taking a shower, washing your clothes, and the boredom. Hours upon hours of nothing to do. And the constant noise. There was nowhere to go where it was truly quiet. Fortunately, I eventually got arrested for shoplifting, reached out to family who helped me get back on my feet. Glad to hear you're back on your feet, bro. When you're a teenager, it seems kind of cool to sleep in the car, on the couch or floor of a friend or acquaintance, or for your dad to scam a rented apartment for a month or two without paying for it. Moving around every few months carrying everything that you can in an old Honda Civic seems like an adventure. We once moved a couch across town in it. We must have looked like a couple of idiots. Once after a few months of staying in a place where we had no furniture, were sleeping on the floor, the carpet of which was so flea-infested that you could literally see the fleas hopping around, the landlord got so frustrated with us basically squatting in his property, my dad promised to pay and never did, that he removed the front door. So we went out to scam some food from somewhere and came back to find no front door. Which in retrospect is a pretty awesome way to get someone out of your property. One of the ways we scammed food would be to go to the breakfast buffet of a fancy hotel, tell the server that we had a room there, eat a ton of food and just walk out. This was also kind of fun, but looking back it is a kind of fracked up way for a dad to treat his teenage kid. Honestly, walking into a hotel and having breakfast is quite the move. It may be illegal, but so is stealing, and the hotel would be more likely to just ban you instead of arresting you when you have your son in tow. I remember being really hungry and acting weird because of the low blood sugar, almost delirious. This was when I made a futile attempt to run away from an abusive home with no money. I ended up going back because of that. I'm so sorry to hear that. How are you doing now? I was 13 when my parents kicked me out and told me they no longer wanted anything to do with me. I was terrified to visit a shelter because I'd known some foster kids and the whole system scared me, plus I wanted to continue going to the same school. And didn't want to lose my friends too. The scariest part at that age was really finding out what I was hoping to eat. There had been a dilapidated trailer just minutes down the road from my dad's place, so I stayed in that. I don't think it all really hit me until I had to choose one night between food and blankets because the temperature was expected to drop down to the mid-30s and I had only had one somewhat thin blanket at that point. The next day, I put on my best attire, which was nothing impressive, and asked for a job at Long John Silver's. I lied and told them I was 15 and I worked 5 days a week rushing over after school. I ate more unhealthy than I have since to save money for some form of shelter, which came in the form of a '91 Toyota Camry that I purchased out of the thrifty nickel for $300. I loved that clunker, plus heating myself was much easier. From there it was mostly uphill. Found an older lady willing to rent me her garage without any sort of credit check. Took a couch off the side of the road to sleep on. I even had internet in there where I mostly read scary stories all night. I wish video streaming services were really a thing back then, and I just kinda learned to roll with the punches. My childhood wasn't normal. It was downright terrifying a good chunk of the time, but it is what made me who I am today. I was only homeless for about 6 weeks, at 36 years of age. After several years of depression and anxiety slowly eroding my resources, relationships and general will to try anymore, I ended up having a final blowout with my GF, who reasonably couldn't handle me anymore. I started sleeping at work, which wasn't even a full-time job. The delicacy involved in not getting caught, and the freedom from the extremely unhealthy state my relationship had been in, kept my mind away from the absolute, abject terror that was hiding beneath the surface. The scary part of homelessness for me was the growing sense that if I fell any further I'd probably never get back up. It takes resources to be clean, fed and rested, and if you aren't those things it's very hard to get resources, let alone find the will to try. But that first night was all triage, all focused on being sure the second night wasn't going to be on the street. I pulled it off for 6 weeks, and that time, actually, saved my life. I was away from conflict, intimately connected to how dire my circumstances had become, forced into a very regular schedule. Routine is really good for me but nigh impossible in a depressive state, and, without bills, was able to save enough for damage deposit and rent. I still struggle with depression in a pretty serious way, but the animal terror of having nowhere and no one really seared itself into me. A better motivation would be the future I want than the future I fear, but as it stands I at least have a motivator strong enough to escape the incredible gravity of mental illness. Edit. Thank you guys for the updates. Makes me feel a little better to hear that I'm not alone in this struggle. I sincerely hope that everyone is doing well, wherever you are. I wasn't homeless to the extreme that some other guys I got to know who camped in the woods outside of town were, but I did a spell at a mission in town for a summer. The first night was pretty rough. I had been living with some friends after losing my place, but life caused them all to go separate ways, so one drove me to the mission and pretty much was like, "K bye." The mission was your typical ultra-conservative Christian ran shelter. The owners were hyper-aggressively masculine, to the point where they demanded your respect even while driving around in their brand-new sports cars and treating you like dirt. The guys living there were a mix of ex-cons and drug addicts, but there were also some older gentlemen who were there simply because they were old and the government assistance wasn't enough. You have to adopt new ways of thinking amidst the less reputable side of that crowd. Learn how to keep people from stealing your stuff, learn how to talk to people who are drugged senseless so they don't start beef with you. I pretty much spent that summer walking around town from dawn to dusk looking for a job. Pretty sure I applied at literally every business I could, updated with them regularly. Did my best to avoid picking up any addictions. A year later I'm sitting in a rented house with a lovely girlfriend and a cozy desk job. And I'd rather die than go back to that hell. I packed 3 bags, one with clothes, blankets, and a pillow. One with food, and one with books. I couch surfed for a little bit, a week or 2 with each of my friends, slept in my car while I had it. I used other people's kitchens to cook stolen food and ate food that 7-Eleven threw away. Every morning at about 6 a.m., night shift would throw out all the food that sat too long. I would wait for the clerk to go back inside, and then fish the bag out of the dumpster. Slept outdoors in some parks after the car got towed and I used up my friend's goodwill. Got really good at 5 to 10 minutes wash-ups in public bathrooms with hand soap. Teeth, armpits, underboobs, and butt. Let me tell you how nasty hand soap tasted. Would occasionally wash my underwear with hand soap real quick too, and dry it with the hand dryers. I would generally use 2 24-hour McDonald's at about 4 a.m. so no one would walk in on me. What I would do is I would panhandle outside of a subway station for enough money for a crack rock, an egg of heroin, a needle, and a sandwich and tea. If you wear semi-professional clothes and say, OMG, my purse got stolen, does anyone have any spare change, you get more money than just asking AMD wearing, like, jeans. I would then go to the first McDonald's, order the sandwich and say I had to use the bathroom. Then I would do a wash-up, grab the sandwich, and eat it on the way to the next McDonald's. At the second McDonald's, I would order a tea and ask for lemon juice, pocket the juice and ask to use the restroom. In the restroom I would use the juice to break down the crack, mix it with the heroin, and shoot up. Then, sadly, I would usually actually use the bathroom in a park or something. Did this for years until I accidentally got pregnant. I would be goddamned if I screwed my kid up by being a junkie, so I cold turkeyed everything. I own a house now and will be 14 years clean on November 18th. Edited for clarity and spelling. I lived at school until I dropped out due to a bunch of personal reasons piling up. My mom was mad that I dropped out and wouldn't even talk to me the first few days after, and my relationship with my father is complicated, non-existent. I took the train to my hometown, even though I didn't know what I would do or where I would go when I got there. I ended up staying the first night in my brother's room, not quite an apartment, just the one room with a kitchen and bathroom he shares with like 5 other people. After that, I posted to social media that I was in this unfortunate situation, and a friend I had lost touch with despite once being very close offered that I could stay with him and his fiancée until I got a place of my own. I never actually had to sleep outside, and I found an apartment after about 1 month, so all in all I was pretty lucky with how it turned out. Oh, and my mom and I are cool now, and my dad and I are also trying to rebuild our relationship after he finally divorced his no longer new wife. I've always referred to her as his new wife even though it's been over a decade. You still keep in touch with that friend? Sounds like a hell of a guy. I was homeless for a little while in the 80s. It's terrifying at first. You feel so unsafe. I was a teenager, and wasn't willing to close my eyes and sleep on a park bench alone, so I went to a local shelter and lied about my age. They forced me to shower and do a pee test. It turns out the women in that shelter were scarier than the street, so the next night I didn't go back. I slept in a park but ultimately made squatter friends and stayed with them. It was very much a community and I felt safe and loved there. The biggest problem with being homeless in the city is no one wants to let you use the bathroom. Even park bathrooms are locked. Squat peeing in between cars can be done quickly and undercover, but when you get your period it's a nightmare. These days I have stability, so I never pass a homeless person without buying them some food or giving them a little money. And if they use it for drugs or alcohol I don't care. Living on the streets is hard. Drink if you need to, my friend. Someone who gets it. Most homeless people I know aren't homeless due to addiction, but addicts due to homelessness. It is very hard. Self-medication is almost the only escape. I once was fooled by an ex into moving back in with her after a breakup. After a couple of weeks she decided to have a yard sale. This yard sale ended up featuring most of my stuff. Then with money in hand she decided it was time I went back to my place. My place which had nothing in it. My place which I had given notice on. My place which was already awaiting a new renter. I spent my last 2 weeks sleeping on a hardwood floor using sweaters as blankets, and then when the day came to vacate I threw all my clothes in a plastic bag and just started walking. I was destitute. I had absolutely nothing and no idea where to start. It was right in the Canadian winter, so staying outside would be a death sentence in many cases, so I did the only thing I could think of. I sat in a 24-hour Tim Hortons. I used what little money I had to purchase small coffees once in a while, so I at least had an excuse to sit there. Eventually my cash ran out and I thought for sure I'd get the boot. Then one of the ladies working the counter came over and just handed me my usual order. I guess she probably figured out what was going on and felt bad. The second time she did it I struggled not to cry. I'm pretty thankful because my next idea if I was asked to leave was to politely refuse, then sit and wait for the cops. Better than freezing to death. Morning came and I had saved only enough to catch a single bus. Headed downtown to try to find some friends. I did, and I couch surfed between a lot of them. I never spent a night out in the cold, but I spent many in a coffee shop or bouncing between friends. It was the worst my depression ever got and the closest I ever came to actually ending my life. Things are a million times better for me now, but I'll never forget how worthless I felt. The first time, I had to live in a motel for half a year. Each night was the same as the last. Cramped, upsetting, but dry and safe. The second time, I got lucky and was already staying at my grandparents' house the night when I became homeless again. Thankfully, they allowed me to stay until I eventually got a new home. The first night there was blissful peace and ignorance. Doesn't sound like a situation anyone should have to be in. I'm sorry you had to experience that feeling, but I'm very glad to hear you landed a new home. I was only 13, the first night I had to just turn the fear into strength. It got easier and easier every day. I figured out how to get clean, where to sleep, where to eat. It was easier to get used to than when I got a home again and had to get used to staying in a house again. How did you lose a home at 13? Run away from abuse? That is so sad. You had to grow yourself up, as I have said about me, but mine was only psychological. I'm not sure if this exactly counts as homeless, but it sure felt like it at the time. I'd lived with my partner in his house for 2 years and put up with domestic abuse pretty much from the beginning. I had 2 children from a previous relationship, so felt like I had to stay and I should be grateful. One day it got far too much and I felt that the kids could be in danger, aged 7 and 3 at the time, so I literally packed 1 change of clothes each, a few pairs of underwear and a pair of PJs each, and walked out the door. I had less than 30 pounds on me, with the clothes on our backs and that one bag. Was the scariest time of my life. I got on a train and went to my closest council office. We sat in that office for nearly 24 hours before they found us a B&B to stay in for a couple of days, was about 4 hours away from the kids' schools and my only support, my mom. I understand they did it to keep my ex from knowing where I was, but I've never felt so alone. We got moved from one B&B to the next for 9 months. The 9 months were the hardest of my life, before we finally got offered a flat to settle down in. I know a lot of people have had it worse, but I'll always feel guilty for putting my children through that at such a young age. Edit. Thank you all so much for your kind words on a comment I thought would get lost. I'm overwhelmed with all the love and have shed a few tears tonight. It really does mean a lot to me, so thanks again, kind strangers. XX. I don't recall my very first time exactly. I do remember looking for a friend that was homeless and his friends ended up watching over me. Everyone was drunk except me. I didn't sleep. More recently, less than a month ago, I lost my housing and everything I own. I'm alone this time. I sleep during the day and browse Reddit at night. I was homeless for 10 years the first time. And I am terrified now. I hope you can find a job and stable source of income. I feel like I'm too late to the party, but I was actually born homeless. My mom put newborn me into a small laundry basket filled with blankets she'd been gifted. I spent the first year of my life living out of a car with my family. My mom had my 5-year-old brother and 4-year-old sister with her, too. all living out of a grand caravan in the early 90s. She'd taken us to Wyoming to hide in the Rocky Mountains, so, at least I got to sleep under the stars at night. I've been homeless most of my life. I have stories about it if anyone finds this and is interested. Let's hear some. The extremes most people here are describing are actually only the pointed end of homelessness. Far more people lack their own personal private safe space, but do have places to crash. Maybe it's on a family member or friend's couch. Not roughing it, but not necessarily super secure or their own. This applies to massive numbers of people. And it's good when we have such charity and support networks, but it helps to mask the scope of the issue, which is far larger than it usually appears. I read somewhere that the most common length of time for someone to be homeless is 1 day. The second most common time is 2 days. Etc. People assume it's a bell curve, but it's a power law. Your massive numbers makes sense for the fewer that 1 day group. Earlier this summer we spent a month sleeping in my boyfriend's car. It was freeing not to be around people I hate, but I could only say that because I had the luxury of his car, with the windows covered at night, versus a shelter. It got very hot though, so we'd spend all day up until 10 or 11 outside of the car, showering at the gym and going to sleep in the hospital parking garage. He was working then, so we ate a ton of fast food. There were nights where he did sleep at the house and I slept in the car, not being welcome, so I begged for a blade for self-defense, thinking I was going to try to take some would-be attacker down with me. We are back on his parents' property now, but in the garage instead of the house. Honestly though, I still feel like I haven't had a home in the 6 years I've been living here, and my boyfriend hates it here too because of the aftermath of the conflict between myself and his brother's girlfriend. I get food and shelter, but I still feel kind of homeless. What was the conflict and why aren't you welcome? It didn't really occur to me that I was homeless for a couple weeks. I was 16, and my mom and I were in a domestic abuse situation. She fled to a friend's house, and I fled to my friend's house, and then from there, sofa surfed for a few weeks until my boyfriend's mom caught on that something wasn't quite right. I had spent random nights at their house prior in the spare room, but during the 2 weeks I had stayed 3 times with them, and at dinner she gently put down her fork and goes, "Sarah, something is going on. Tell me about it." It wasn't a question. So I started bawling at the dinner table and realized I didn't have a home, and in the next 5 minutes, me, her, my boyfriend, and his dad all had our shoes on and in the car, on our way to the abusive house to grab my things. Then they made the spare room my real room for a year before I could go to university and get an apartment. There are some great people in the world. I was 18 and had depression. Only had to do the final exams and I would have been good to go. But I panicked and didn't attend, which caused me to fail, of course. Me failing made my depression even worse. My parents couldn't take it anymore, packed my clothes in a case and set me on the street. I had no idea where to go and didn't want to sleep in the city like most homeless do because I was too afraid of something happening to me or the few things I had while I sleep. So I went deep into the woods, opened the case with my clothes and curled up in there to sleep. Needless to say, I didn't sleep much that night. I was just too disappointed in myself for being such a failure and cried a lot. Thank God I wasn't homeless long before my grandparents took me in until I found a job. When I had a job, my parents took me back in and I went to therapy. I'm good now, but getting abandoned by my parents when I needed them the most still hurts to this day. Sorry to hear what you had to go through, but damn, how do you face your parents? Actually, how do your parents even face you for abandoning you like that? My ex-wife made up a bunch of shit to get a restraining order. I got served at work while she simultaneously shut off my phone service and locked me out of our shared bank account. This was January 7, 2016. I had a t-shirt and slacks to wear for clothes, and nowhere to sleep. My car didn't have working heat. Thank God for my parents who got me a hotel, new phone, and some money for clothes. I ended up living in an extended stay hotel for 2 months while I looked for an apartment, and got my affairs in order. The restraining order was dismissed, the divorce went to trial, and I got the house and the kids. I'm glad this ended well, but that's so fracked that it's even possible for this to happen. My story isn't as rough as some others. I guess I just saw unavoidable homelessness coming about 12 months in advance and I was able to prepare for it. I basically used all my savings to buy a van and kit it out with the basics, fridge, toilet, etc. It wasn't anything fancy, and by spending that money I'd definitely shortened the amount of time I could rent for, but it's been a lot better than just sleeping on the street. The first night, after my lease ended and my only home was my van, I went to a spot I'd already cased out. I wanted to be somewhere nice on the first night, just so I might feel like things would be alright. And it was a really great night. It was just me, on the beach, no one around for miles. There were so many stars. I woke up just in time to see the sunrise over the ocean, a wild rooster woke me up grinning face with sweat, and I even found an abandoned camp chair on the beach to sit in. I did really feel like things would be alright then. And the homelessness thing has been good for me. I just feel calmer. Maybe because I'm outside almost all the time. Maybe because I read and write and draw more. Though obviously my experience is a bit better, because I have a vehicle and I'd prepared. Absolutely sucked and still does. I slept in a shopping mall that happened to be open all night. The next day I was able to get in supported housing that is shared with other people. Fortunately my phone is paid off and I have unlimited data, so that gives me something to do, as I was big into gaming before all the shit happened. I'm currently living on one bowl of oats a day until next week, when hopefully I receive some government help. I don't take drugs, drink alcohol, and I have no possessions to sell for food. The thought of eating something such as pizza or a roast dinner sounds so amazing, but it's so far away that I try not to think about it. I spend my time watching streamers and browsing Reddit. You would no believe the amount of reposts when you spend so much time on here lol. _random_acts_of_pizza. Months of depression lead me to travel with no money. I got to a really big city by train. First month I stayed at a dude's house, in which he wasn't living. Then I thought it was a little too much and decided to go to the streets, where I already had made some friends who already were living in the streets. The first night was weird. At some point, all this wandering souls gathered besides a train station and everyone started sharing the food they've got during the day. We ended cooking a fondue inside a big tomato can. It was the first time I tried fondue. Then it was 2 months of a routine: sleep there, wake up with the sun, wash myself and the clothes in a river, and go with a friend to do stunts in a stoplight. The last night before deciding to go back to my hometown, a group of neo-Nazis attacked us. Now I have a 1-inch scar in the left side of my skull. I'm alright now. Father of 2, in love with my wife and with my own house in the woods. Fucking Nazi white trash. Hope they're having a horrible time now. What do you mean by do stunts in a stoplight? Currently homeless and unemployed, and have been for 13 months, homeless, 9 unemployed, and I don't know what the frack to do in life or where to go next. Any and all recommendations are welcome. I am located in the U.S. Do you have a Goodwill or Salvation Army near you? They can usually help with employment if not a place to stay. Also check drug and alcohol rehabs. We have one near us that helps with homelessness and employment. Usually have to stay at their shelter until they can line up an apartment or something for you. Good luck to you, friend. I was young, 11 years old, but I was aware my mom was on drugs and that my situation was going where it ended up. It started out with moving a lot, state to state, wherever the cheapest place to live was. The living conditions got worse with each move. In our last house as a family before we got taken away by CPS, we had to clean it out before moving in, some deal my mom made with the landlord. It was disgusting. Full of mouse shit, dirty needles, porno magazines, and the floor was completely covered in garbage. Oh well, I thought, at least it's a house. I was excited for a new place to live. Then, the gas got shut off, and the electricity, in the middle of winter. My mom's car got the windshield busted out of it and we used plastic wrap to fix it. We were always cold. The cops would knock on our door and we'd do as we were trained: hide under the beds, don't answer, don't make a sound. Once the utilities were out I knew we'd be moving again. We stayed in a homeless shelter for a short while, until school started back up. I was in middle school for less than 2 months before, in the middle of the night, as usual, my mom said to pack our things and we'd be moving that night. But I didn't realize how bad on meth she was, not fully, not until we arrived in Death Valley and slept outside of a church. Desert nights are very cold and the days are very miserable when you live outside. I just accepted it. I felt my 11-year-old heart grow cold, like a candle was blown out in me. My mom didn't enroll us in school, we got MRSA, a flesh-eating disease and got no medical treatment, we weren't fed so we'd steal food from stores and ask restaurants for free samples. I met two strangers who cared and bought us food. It was embarrassing, I felt unworthy. Being homeless made me feel a little less human than everyone around me. I could go on about the experience but this comment is long enough lol. I was 17, a week after I graduated high school. My adoptive mother kicked me out. She was mentally and physically abusive that a massive opioid addiction didn't help. Well, all I had was a social security card and what I could carry. Couldn't get an ID until after she thankfully died because she knew I'd find out I was adopted as soon as she gave me the BS birth certificate that was just a printout on a very old piece of paper that didn't even have a raised seal on it. No, I don't know how that even worked, but I imagine she was just too lazy to go get a new one after she got the one the state sent her after my adoption. Mind you, I was 19 when I was officially told despite constantly questioning why I looked nothing like them. I was ecstatic to leave. Living on the streets I had the best time of my life compared to the battlefield that was my adoptive mother. I've always had to survive in my own way so surviving the streets took a lot of creativity I already had. I slept in a local park bathroom that oddly had heat and air. Not once did I beg for money on a corner or stay in a mission. To this day I have hip and knee problems thanks to going from locked in my room unless I was at school to walking hundreds of miles. TLDR, I was ecstatic, had the time of my life, and survived by living in a park bathroom. My adoptive mother with a pill addiction wanted a baby and not a child to raise, so she got rid of me as soon as she could. Edited for grammar and context. I walked for as long as I could and passed out on a bench in front of a church. So someone woke me up and asked if I was okay in the morning and I explained the situation and then they told me to leave since it was private property and there would be people there soon and they didn't want me making the place look bad. As soon as the words left his mouth I realized that I was already viewed as less than human after one night. I ended up going to work still as I never told them I was kicked out of my home and showering at the local community college since they never checked to see if the people using the gym were students. Eventually I got back on my feet and even now that I'm not homeless I still feel that way inside often, like I'm less than human. You're not frack that guy. Subscribe. Or don't. I don't care.